Okay, so now we have talked about value. We've made our value scale, at least 5 different sections that show the darkest to lightest of the pencil we're using. And of course you can use drawing pencils and get more of a range, but number 2 is fine. So now I want to focus on what will eventually be the shading of a sphere. So when we are shading and using value, basically taking a flat shape like a circle and making it into what looks like a sphere, we need to first know where our light source is. So if my light source is up here, the top right, it can be on the other side. It can be many different places, but for now, it's going to be here. So our light source is going to go this way. So if this is right now a circle and I want to make it into a sphere, my highlight, where the light is going to be the hottest, is basically going to be about right here on the sphere. So we will draw a circle. We will label highlight. I want you to have this grid, this diagram in your sketchbook. It doesn't have to be right under your value scale, but if you have space like I do, you can do that. And your circle can be a little smaller too. So highlight. Then the space where we would have the darkest shadow on our sphere, it's called a core shadow. That would be the furthest away from the light, where the light doesn't reach at all. So almost if you think of the moon, and this is the sun up here, the darkest spot will be on this spot, and we would only see this part of the moon. So this is our core shadow. Then we have our cast shadow, which is if this is on a table surface, we would have a shadow just like if you're standing with the sun behind you and you look at your shadow. So your shadow would be reflected on the floor or the sidewalk or the ground. So that's our cast shadow. Now there's a little more detail here that I want to share with you. So we have our highlight, we have our darkest part. So the space in between is where the light transitions, goes from darkest to lightest. So that is going to be our transitional or our mid tone. Some people call it mid value or middle tone. You will also hear transitional tone. So mid-tone, mid-value. So brightest here, then it transitions to the darkest here, and here's the shadow. Now there are 2 other things I want to bring up to you that are important to make things look as realistic as possible. There's something called reflected light on our actual object to make it look like an object. And that reflected light is there because this light source comes down, say it's way up high. It comes down and it bounces off of the table and back onto just the very edge of the bottom. So you'll see a teeny bit of light there. It won't be super bright, but you'll see a little bit of light. The cast shadow also is darkest in the core here, and as it moves out, it gets lighter. So we don't have to label that. I just want you to know that it goes the darkest in the center of your shadow, and then it moves and it gets a little lighter on the edges. Almost blurs away sometimes. Okay, so once you make this diagram, we can move on to your shading of a sphere. So on this shading of a sphere, you'll notice the highlight where it's hottest, this transition where it goes from light to dark. It's darkest here, the cast shadow. Then we have our reflected light. Then we have our core shadow here, and then our reflected light. Then we have our cast shadow. So it's core shadow here on the sphere, cast shadow on the table. And it's darkest in the center, and then it gets a little lighter as I could have transitioned that better. It gets lighter as it moves to the edge.